Dragons in A Song of Ice and Fire seem to not be able to pass over the top of the wall. We see Daenerys fly her dragons north of the wall in A Game of Thrones Season 7, but I think I have an explanation for that, which I'll cover later in the video. In book, we have several bits of textual evidence that seem to imply that dragons would not be able to fly over the wall. Firstly, we have the good Queen Alysanne, who took her dragon Silverwing north to the wall, and she tried to make it fly beyond the wall on 3 separate occasions. Each time, the dragon refused her command. These were the only times that this dragon had ever refused Queen Alysanne's command in its entire life, which is obviously something that George seems to be drawing a little bit of attention to, because this is a consciousness bond. The dragon-rider bond is a very deep thing, and the fact that it would be disobeyed on only 3 occasions, and it was all revolving around flying over the wall, seems to be George drawing a little bit of attention to the issue. But I think he may have actually already given us the answer. He just did it as George R.R. Martin does, with all of the information pieced together in several little clues which he has scattered throughout these novels. One of which was hidden, of course, at the entrance to Bloodraven's cave, and another of which was hidden in the Battle of Castle Black. I believe he may have in fact intentionally created the exact same sort of magical situation, but did it in an icy form rather than the fiery dragon form, so that he could show us what would happen without us ever being able to recognize it. So unless there's a scene that I have forgotten from Season 7 of Game of Thrones, I think that actually it is pretty well established that dragons can't fly directly over the wall, and we'll come back to how Daenerys got her dragons north of the wall a little bit later, but first, let's try and establish what exact magic is preventing the dragons from passing over the top of the wall in the first place. Now, to understand how exactly I think this works, we need to look at a few things we've already covered on the channel. First of all, we need to establish that we around these parts believe the wall is a giant wall of weirwoods in an ice shell, and you can see all of that in detail in a whole big playlist or 2 on the channel. Now, very recently we have covered exactly how the ward works by taking a look at the example George gives us with Bloodraven's cave. When Bran is warging into Hodor, and Hodor crosses over the barrier, Bran is kicked out of the mind meld. So he's ejected back into his own body, but then once he's on the other side of it, he's fine. He can warg back into Hodor, everything is great. Same with Ghost and Jon, the wall is functioning in the same way when they're on the opposite sides of the wall. They can't feel each other, the warg bond is broken. The mind meld, the consciousness merging, is broken by this barrier. So the natural thing that you would think then when applying this to a dragon and a dragon rider is that they would in some way have their bond broken upon crossing the wall. And I think that is sort of the issue, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. And to understand that, we need to go to my theory for what the 3 heads of the dragon is in reference to. So I've covered this in more detail on a video explaining the lyrics to Daemon's song that he sings in House of the Dragon Season 1. Now, the song has lyrics that were written by people who are in the know on George lore, and they said that the song was specifically written with meaning behind it and then translated, and they needed to add the 4th verse to preserve the meaning. So there's definitely some intended meaning, and there's a reason that he's singing this song to this dragon. Now, to be brief, what the lyrics and the other textual clues and just what George R.R. Martin likes to do in general all seem to be implying to me is that the 3 heads of the dragon refers to a consciousness merge that is required to have dragons exist at all. The 2 heads that are merged into the dragon to birth the dragon being some sort of natural dragon soul, details somewhat to be determined, and then a sacrifice which goes into the dragon to be the 2nd head of the mind meld. There is likely some sort of fire and blood magic going on here to create the very powerful dragon consciousness. And then the lyrics of Daemon's song also imply when they say 2 heads to a 3rd sing, and if you view this song as getting this wild dragon ready to bond with a rider, that the 3rd head of the dragon is the rider itself. So a fully fledged dragon is a dragon and a rider all fully merged, 3 heads of the dragon. That's the most powerful consciousness merge in fire magic. And Fire and Blood is a recipe, 3 heads of the dragon is a recipe, the Targaryen, heraldry, the sigil, the house words, they've all got deeper magical meanings hidden within them, in addition to being intimidating and badass. Now, if you want more textual clues in the actual books themselves, besides just the lyrics to Daemon's song, take a look at Daenerys' House of the Undying vision, where she sees Mirri Maz Duur with a dragon bursting forth from her brow. Alright, so what that implies in this magical vision context where she's seeing truths, that's implying that Mirri's consciousness became a dragon when she died, right? She's in the pyre singing and a dragon is bursting forth from her brow. Her consciousness, upon death, is going into one of these dragons. It's a sacrificial merge. I've talked about it in the other video in greater detail. Go check that out if you're interested. Also, just to give a little clarification on top of that, because it's actually a 2-part video. The first part is explaining how the sacrifices go into the dragons for the 3 heads of the dragon, and the second part is a bit of a meme explanation of a theory that is based on the idea that Mirri is in Viserion, who is, you know, the dragon in the show who betrays Dany, and if one of her dragons was going to betray her, it's probably the lady who hated her, and then it's the dragon that she went into that would be the most likely to turn on Daenerys, and then also that dragon is the most likely to like Marwyn, who's about to show up, because Mirri was friends with Marwyn, so if her consciousness is in Viserion, well, that leads to the video Marwyn will ride Mirri Maz Duur. Now, the correction or clarification, rather, that I want to add is I think it's more of like an animalistic instinct level that these souls are going into their next life in the dragons, right? Like, Mirri is in Viserion, but it's not like all of her memories and her entire fully fledged, fully formed consciousness, like plotting revenge or anything like that. Drogo is in Drogon, which means that Dany is going to have a very easy time bonding with Drogon compared to other people. It means that Drogo is going to be a big, fierce, fighty boy instinctually. It means that instinctually he is going to be comfortable and at home, chilling in the Dothraki Sea and ruling from a dragon mount that he's building there. And that's like instinctually what his heart wants to do. Right, it's like his natural animalistic instincts. It's not genuinely Drogo in there being like, hey, Dany, let's go back to the Dothraki Sea and hang out. It's like an animalistic feeling inside of him that he feels at home there, right? In the same way that, like, human beings seeing specific landscapes will get nice, warm, fuzzy feelings inside. It's an animalistic instinct. I think Viserion will get those nice, warm, fuzzy feelings from Marwyn because of the Mirri consciousness. So that's a quick clarification on what level I think this consciousness merge is happening, but the most important thing you need to know for this theory to go forward is that the consciousness merge involves a dead person merging into essentially an animal soul, and then they are, if they have a third head, controlled by essentially a warg, right? Like, you could view it as an animal with a dead guy merged into it, controlled by a warg. And does George ever give us an example of an animal with a dead guy in it, controlled by a warg, trying to fly over the wall? Think about it for a moment, because the answer is yes. He gives us literally exactly that, and he shows us exactly what would happen. Now, the example I am talking about is, of course, Orell with his eagle. Orell is the wildling who Jon has beef with. He is north of the wall, and Orell doesn't believe that he's really turned over, and so they have just little spats the whole way, and eventually it leads to Jon killing him. But Orell is the warg who scouts with an eagle, so when Jon kills him, his soul goes into the eagle, merges with the eagle comes down, slashes Jon in the face with his talons, and then eventually flies off, goes around, continues to hate Jon, but in the end, it is eventually taken over and warged by Varamir's Sixskins. Now, if George is using this eagle as a little bit of an indicator of what happens with the three-headed dragon bond, you can see how the situation is very mirrored here. It is a dead person merged with an animal consciousness and then controlled by the third head. And it is very like George to give us an example of what he's doing with his magic, but hide it somewhere else, right? Hide it somewhere where we wouldn't exactly recognize it until a little bit later. So this is kind of like an icy version, whereas the dragon bond is a fiery version, but they're both three-headed, warg-conscious, animal consciousness bonds. Now, I won't argue that an eagle and a dragon function in exactly the same way, but if George is going to leave us some hints, one of the hints that we give is that these bits of the consciousness that remain in there definitely do give little instinctual vibes, because Varamir says that he can feel the hatred for Jon in the bird, and he can now feel it in himself because he's merged with the bird. So, like, he just, like, low-key, on a vibes level, just kind of hates Jon a little bit, and he just straight up tells him that. He's like, hey, yo, I kind of just really low-key hate you because this bird really, really hates you on, like, a instinctual vibes level. And that's because, you know, you killed the guy who's inside of him, and he's not real thrilled with that. So yeah, this bird's not a fan of you. So I think that the warg bond going into an animal is going to leave a much stronger instinctual mark on that animal than a sacrifice going into a dragon, because of the, like, you know, the intimate nature of that bond that existed before the merging happened, right? So I don't think, like, Miri's hatred of Daenerys is coming through as strongly as Orell's hatred of Jon is, but I think it's a similar effect that's going on. And I think that's a similar reason to why Drogon acts a little bit like Drogo on a vibes level. But okay, so now that we've established that we are witnessing a three-headed consciousness merge in Orell's eagle, once Orell has died, gone into it, and the eagle has been claimed by Varamir, well then let's take a look at what happens when the eagle tries to fly over the wall at the Battle of Castle Black, because it bursts into flames. It is literally ripped apart, and it is said that Varamir himself goes mad from the experience. Now, Varamir himself isn't fully mad. He describes himself as half mad with pain and terror, and so, like, in the moment, he's going crazy because he died in the eagle. He says he burned, and he died, and then he ran, and he was half mad with pain and terror, but then he reflects on, like, feeling bad about it, and then he, like, comforts himself by being like, well, everyone ran. There were knights with their armor. They were invincible. You either ran or you died. I did the right thing. So he's of a sound mind at this point, like, rationalizing his actions, but in the moment, he recognizes that he was half mad with pain and terror and fled, because he witnessed burning and death within this, you know, eagle. He actually goes into further detail in the Dance with Dragons prologue with the following. His last death had been by fire. I burned. At first, in his confusion, he thought some archer on the wall had pierced him with a flaming arrow. But the fire had been inside him, consuming him, and the pain. Varamir had died 9 times before. He had died once from a spear thrust, once with a bear's teeth in his throat, and once in a wash of blood as he brought forth a stillborn cub. He died his first death when he was only 6, as his father's axe crashed through his skull. Even that had not been so agonizing as the fire in his guts, crackling along his wings, devouring him. When he tried to fly from it, his terror fanned the flames and made them burn hotter. One moment he had been soaring above the wall, his eagle's eyes marking the movements of the men below. Then the flames had turned his heart into a blackened cinder, and sent his spirit screaming back into his own skin, and for a little while he'd gone mad. Even the memory was enough to make him shudder. So why did that happen? Why did the eagle burn? Melisandre, like, slyly takes credit for it. It's like, you know, because the thing bursts into flames, everyone, like, whispers, oh, it was the Fire Witch. All of Stannis' men are saying it was Melisandre, and Jon asks her, like, hey, I heard that was you, and she's just like, Yeah, the Lord of Light has long fiery talons. You never know where he's gonna strike. I don't think she had a darn clue what was going on with this bird. I think the bird burst into flames because it passed over the barrier of the wall, and this is what the wall does to merged consciousness. When John and Ghost are on opposite sides of the wall, their merge is broken. When Bran and Hodor go on opposite sides of the Weirwood barrier at Bloodraven's cave, their merge is broken. Bran is kicked back into his own body, literally ripped apart from Hodor. But the thing is, when you're a three-headed merge in one body, you don't have anywhere else to go back to. The one head can get kicked back into the warg, right? So the Dragon Rider or the warg in this situation is going to be completely fine. But the two-headed merged soul within one body that passes over this barrier is going to be shattered. It is going to be ripped apart within its own body on a mental consciousness level. This thing has nowhere to go. So a three-headed merge in this way is going to be ripped apart by crossing over the barrier of the wall, in the way we see Bran and Hodor ripped apart. And yeah, with no body left to go back to, it's a violent and destructive experience. That's why we see Orell's eagle burst into flames, and in my opinion, that is George giving us an example of what happens when a three-headed consciousness merge tries to go over the wall. Also, it definitely feels worth just a quick tangent to mention that it is perhaps the reason that Varamir, who is like the most experienced warg that we see in all of the books, would fly this eagle over the wall and make this mistake, is perhaps because even he doesn't quite understand the magic of the wall and how it would affect a three-headed consciousness merge, whereas maybe a warg who would fly an eagle over the wall to scout under normal circumstances would maybe lose track of the eagle once it gets on the other side of the wall for a minute, and then regain control once it comes back on, the right side of the barrier. Well, in this case, the eagle itself just bursts into flames when it gets too close to the wall, which is an unexpected result, obviously, because Varamir is shocked and damaged by this. So if this was a thing that would normally happen with a two-headed consciousness, well, then you would assume he would be more careful of it. But perhaps the reason he falls into this trap is because it is a three-headed consciousness with nowhere else for these two merged consciousnesses to go. And I do also understand the temptation to say that no, this was fire magic, this was Melisandre genuinely burning this eagle up, and that's what happened. And the reason that I don't actually buy that is, again, because Melisandre, rather than being like, oh yeah, hell yeah, I burned that bird right up, did that right good with my fire magic, that's what I did. She's just like, vaguely like, yeah, the Lord works in mysterious ways, he's got long fiery talons. Like, I think clearly she doesn't know exactly what happened, but anytime she sees any fire magic, she assumes it's the will of R'hllor, and so she's just like genuinely like, oh yeah, the Lord of Light did that. It wasn't me, it was the Lord of Light. And that's probably what she genuinely believes. And we don't see her ever reflecting on having this ability, and we never see her at any other point in the story have the ability to do spontaneous combustion to other life forms, like using her mind from a distance. She doesn't have that magical power any other time, but the wall has a matching magical power if we, use the magical logic that we've laid out so far in this video. So Melisandre, no other examples of spontaneous combustion ability, but we do have other examples of warded weirwood walls ripping apart a bonded consciousness, both in Hodor and in Orell's eagle. And if we have a three-headed bonded consciousness within a dragon, well, you can see the recipe for disaster. So yeah, it would seem that Silverwing had very good reason to refuse Queen Alysanne's request to fly over the wall. It would have literally ripped him apart on a mental and physical level, and probably let her fall out of the air to her doom. Now, it is up in the air whether or not the dragon itself could feel this, and could, sense on some level what would happen, and therefore stayed south of the wall, or if the ward itself, on some level, fully blocks the dragon, although Orell's eagle flying over the wall seems to imply that it doesn't physically block it from happening, it would just, rip you to shreds. So, in that respect, I think the dragon on some level either knew that it couldn't fly over the wall and consciously chose to refuse, or, as is the case potentially any time you see an animal acting oddly, you could look to time-traveling Bran, and or Bloodraven, and or the Three-Eyed Crow, whatever entity you want to ascribe the ability to set the timeline and influence things through time. You could potentially say that they were trying to help out and influencing Silverwing to get it to refuse to go over the wall, because in the timeline where Silverwing flies over the wall and Alysanne dies, the first night is never ended, and then all of the things that need to happen for this timeline to happen, where the Night's Watch is getting weaker, the wall is getting ready to be brought down, and everything that needs to happen is getting ready to happen. Well, none of it would have happened if Silverwing gets obliterated and Queen Alysanne dies horribly and everyone's left shocked and confused. That whole timeline sounds like it sucks. So Silverwing does not fly over the wall, because it seems like any dragon that would fly over the wall would suffer the same fate as Orell's eagle. A fate that is so bad that Varamir describes it as the worst of all of his deaths, and some of those deaths, in my opinion, sound pretty bad. So definitely let me know what you think of that explanation for a dragon flying over the wall. It's the three-headed consciousness merge, the same way we see with Orell's eagle, that is preventing the dragon from doing this. Now, some of you will notice that I have recently put out a theory which involves someone being flown from south of the wall to north of the wall with a dragon, to not spoil too much more about that. And what I would say about this is, if you were going to fly a dragon from south of the wall to north of the wall, you could still definitely do this. You would just have to fly around the wall. You would go out to the ocean, a significant distance, however far you need to go, to avoid this magic that would rip your dragon atom from atom as its mind is literally shattered. Now, you have to make sure you're going far enough from the wall for this to happen. I don't know exactly how far its magic would extend to the side, but the reason that I would speculate its magic extends up in the air and not out to the side is because, well, it's a magic wall, and just, you know, in some fashion, right, ideas have an inherent meaning, if that makes sense, and the inherent idea of a wall extends upward but not beyond its sideways barriers, if that tracks. And what I mean by that is, imagine there is a field, and it has a fence that is just like not all the way across it, but it's, you know, part way across it, right? It's like half of this field is covered by a fence, but you can just walk around the fence to either side, right? If you just walk around that fence and a cop comes up to you and he's like, hey, you broke in here. You broke past that fence. You're like, no, I didn't. The fence ends. I walked around it. But if that fence extends the entire length of the field and you climb over the fence, the cop says, hey, you broke in here. You broke past that fence. You're like, yeah, I broke past the fence, because a wall doesn't extend to the sides, a wall extends upward. So the ward of a magic wall, in my opinion, would on some level follow the inherent idea of how a wall is supposed to work. I don't know if that tracks to you, but that does, in my opinion, track with how a magic spell would work. The magic cares about the inherent nature of the idea behind it, and I see no reason to believe the wall's magic would extend, you know, to the side forever, so that, like, this entire barrier goes around, like, the entire North Pole of the world, right? That doesn't seem to track. So yeah, the dragon just has to go out to the ocean to get around it. But if you don't do that, if you don't go around it, if you try to go over it, your dragon is going to have a very bad time. Also, a couple things worth noting when we are plotting a couple notable potential examples of dragons flying from the south to the north of the wall. Let's say you wanted to hypothetically go from Winterfell as a snaky-looking dragon up to, I don't know, Bloodraven's Cave for some reason. And if you look at where Winterfell is on a map, it's actually kind of off to the west of Castle Black, and it's more in line with, you know, the Shadow Tower, and it's actually very little bit that you would need to veer off course to just go straight to Bloodraven's Cave without even flying over the wall. You need to, like, go a little bit west and then fly north, But really, you're barely making it a longer journey at all to just completely go around the wall from Winterfell. Daenerys, when she's going north of the wall, the issue with that is the White Hunt episode seems to kind of imply they're in, like, the Frostfangs, and, like, way off, to, like, the northwest a little ways. But, like, if you take that entire scene as happening, like, just in the small area north of Eastwatch, which geographically does not make sense for the terrain that they're in, I get that. But if you take every other part of it as being like, yeah, they're just, like, the few miles north of Eastwatch, all of it kind of also tracks, like, weirdly. And personally, I didn't actually, again, I didn't go back and watch, like, all of the episode because I'm not going to do that. But I did watch what scenes I could find on YouTube just to try and see, like, did the dragons physically fly over the wall? And we get this scene where they're waiting for Jon to come back. And Dany's looking out from the wall, and her dragon is beyond the wall, but it doesn't fly over the wall. It's out beyond the wall, and then they cut to a ship where Jon is on the ship because they're at Eastwatch. So it seems logical that this dragon, who we see doing circles but not passing over the top of the wall, it seems logical that every time Dany flew her dragons north, they went around the wall at Eastwatch. And I would say that unless there's a scene that I've forgotten where they directly fly over the top of it, we should almost, like, 100% take for a fact that that's what happened. They went around it over the ocean every time. So again, to make the White Hunt scene work, you need to throw out the timeline a little bit, or a lot, but if you throw out the geography as well, you have to throw out the timeline less. If you make all of this happen right near Eastwatch, Dany has a quick little route from Dragonstone directly north, and then just a little bit over to the west, and she doesn't have to pass directly over the top of the wall either. So in general, that's what I think is going on with dragons and their refusal to fly over the wall. The wall is a wall of weirwoods, which, just like the entrance to Bloodraven's cave, rips apart any sort of merged consciousness magical entity, and a warg and its animal on opposite sides of the wall are another good example of this. Normally that's not as physically painful of a separation, but when you have a merged consciousness entity within a single body with nowhere else to go, it's a fatal error to try fly over the wall, and I believe that dragons, by their very nature, are a merged consciousness entity created with fire and blood. Thank you all for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. I have a Patreon down in the description if that's what you're into, and I'll see you with something else very soon.